Everybody got the language. All right, calling this meeting to order. Zachary Epps, co-chair of the policy committee meeting. My co-chair who's listed tonight, Ms. Jennifer Lohman, will be in attendance, but we will do a roll call. And we'll start with our virtual attendance. Pamela Henry.
Pam Henry, present.
And then we can start to my left.
Sure. Leah Mulhern, present. Robin Murphy, present.
Ross Whiting, present. Daniel Schultz, present. Roll call, and we will write a motion for the previous meeting's minutes, March 25th, 2025.
So moved.
Second. All in favor of approving?
Aye.
Any nays? All right, the notes from the 25th pass. And I will hand it over to administration to open up the agenda.
Okay, we're going to start with old business, policy 903. Christina Gallagher is going to replace our Ed Diasio this evening from Worcester Pearlstein. So we'll start with policy 903. Christine has the policy up on the it's on the screen now. Policy 903, the title is changed to public comment in board meetings, and it will go up for adoption at the June board meeting. Any questions about policy 903?
To the board. Where did we land with the, did we say 3 minutes, 5 minutes? Where did we land? Three, okay, that's
Three. Yes.
all right.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest point of discussion for the last, any other?
I know, although we said 3 minutes, just FYI, we gave last week the folks that spoke, the attendees at the meeting, like more than 6 minutes, just as a FYI. So we're gonna say 3 minutes, and we need to announce it at the beginning, I think, of the meeting in terms of how long they have to speak.
Sure. Yep. We'll open up to welcome members of the public to tonight's policy committee meeting as well. Right now discussing 903, so we'll open up any comments or questions from folks in person or online. Seeing none, that policy will move forward for consideration for adoption at our next legislative meeting. And Mr. Epps,
I just want to, this is maybe a clarifying question around language in the policy. Just wanted to, I thought there was language around obscene in a previous draft, in last time we saw the draft. So I think that got removed and replaced with the First Amendment language.
Yep, I can speak to that. This paragraph was the change, and essentially, this change was made to kind of make it generally state that any kind of violation of district policy or procedure is grounds to interrupt public comment. So to get rid of all of those definitions to make it cleaner, we simplified it into this paragraph. And it's highlighted right here on the screen. So that was the only change from the last read.
And that is not a significant enough change to warrant a repeat first read. Is that the case?
We don't think so.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, that will move forward for consideration for adoption, and move forward to 220 numbers.
We're looking at policy in AR 223. That was also a title change to tobacco and vaping products.
Right, and I recall this and a few others were bringing language consistency across policy, so there weren't major changes. But open up to any comments or questions from the board. Any questions, comments, thoughts from members of the public? Right. This will also move forward for consideration for adoption. The policies move forward for consideration for adoption. The administrative regulation is not subject to vote, but will still be posted publicly and implemented. All right, so we will move forward to the next 227.
Policy in AR 227, controlled substances. Okay.
Any comments or questions from the board?
I guess broad question around these, just as we're looking at them, it would be helpful, if possible, to highlight any changes that have happened since the previous meeting, just because they're, and not in like great detail, but if there's a high level summary of if there were changes beyond what Mr. Epps already said around the consistency of the language. I don't remember there being much discussion for these outside of that consistency, but.
For 227, I actually tracked take abuse out of the title. Looks like that was done. And also how to handle young children with prescriptions to marijuana was a question that came up. And so I think that was really an ongoing conversation, not something that would have led to an immediate potential change in this policy.
Yeah, it's my understanding that aside from the public comment policy, no other changes were made to any of the old business policies.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right, so we will open it up to members of the public for 227, which is controlled substance.
There's no hands online.
All right, and thanks for pointing out. These are second read policy. This is the second time we've seen this in these policies in this committee. And so sometimes there's changes that are made in between that we talk about more intensely. Sometimes there's less changes and people forward. But thanks for anyone attending who may be less familiar. All right, so that will also move forward for consideration and move forward to the next policy 320.
323 was also a title changed. It went from use of tobacco and electronic smoking products to use of tobacco and vaping products.
All right, opening up to, I didn't track any questions in the last one for this one. Question of any new thoughts, comments on the board? Any thoughts, comments on really what is amounting to a title change in our policy around use of tobacco and vaping products? Or if this is your first time attending, you can ask whatever you'd like about this policy. Great. This as well will move forward for consideration for adoption, and we'll move forward to 351, which covers the same thing, but for our employees. And there was a question what to do about teachers vaping related to this policy, which again, I'm not sure if that would have led to changes in the language or the ongoing conversation, but were there any, I don't think, were there any substantive changes for this?
There were no changes made to this last read.
The title changed to controlled substances. Previously, it was drug and substance abuse.
That'll also move forward for adoption and move forward to 8:32.
8:32 was a new policy that we had at our last meeting. Policy and the AR, opioid antagonist. Was the title.
And I tracked that. A lot of these things Shelton Hamilton School District already does, and this policy was recommended by ESBA. Well, recommended language was added from ESBA. Beyond that, board members, any questions, comments? Members of the public. 8:32 opioid antagonist, which is a new policy for our district, but doesn't represent all new efforts and initiatives. All right, that policy will move forward for consideration for adoption at our next meeting. And our last old business for today, 250.
That's student recruitment.
This one was a new policy, but it was just new because we had already had the student recruitment, but we just really just changed the language, if I recall. Or is it actually a new, was it actually a new policy altogether? Yeah, but I thought we already had one, and it's just we're starting from, I mean, this is really something.
I believe it is new, so I'm not seeing a draft, and this
Yeah.
is derived from, the school code and federal law. So
Mhm.
it's-
Right.
And I believe what came up last meeting was we were doing these things, but regarding recruitment in accordance to that law, but we did not have a local policy to codify.
We do not currently have that policy.
All right. And this is specifically recruitment for military service coming into high school, similar to, you would think, universities, student recruitment of high schoolers. This would be for representatives of the armed forces to recruit students within schools or disclosing information to those. So good. So that is no comments from the board. Any comments from the public on student recruitment policy?
No.
All right, that brings us to a close for old business. All these policies will be considered at our June legislative board meeting, and we'll move forward to new business.
New business, we have 3 policies for new business. The first one is policy in AR 121, field trips.
We were asked by Siobhan, who I believe is unable to attend tonight, to take a look at field trip policy. You'll see that looks like a new policy, but some of this language is consistent with what was in there before. It's just easier to start fresh a bit. And it's our understanding too that once the policy is revised, any kind of field trip forms and those things will also be revised in the future. But this is something that we put together and that we would recommend as a field trip policy. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, comments from the board? Oh, there's Ace. Dr. Whiting.
Thank you.
Thank you, there.
What are the major changes from our prior policy? Are there major changes? Pay attention to.
There really aren't.
What was the impetus for the change?
We were asked by the administration. They were taking a look at their field trip practice and asked us to take a look at the policy. So I'm not sure of all the details, but
My understanding is that the changes, there were not any legal changes, but they were just educational, operational changes. Or updates that were put in this document.
Based on last review date, that is old, based on
Yeah.
our,
Yeah.
10 years is, well, it's not quite, 8 years is unheard of.
You're just
We're
long.
probably on average 3 to 4 years, policy review, so. Context, Mr. Shaw. Oh, did you have anything else?
I'm good, thank you.
One change I did notice in this was the last bullet in red around, and maybe it still is in there, under the very last bullet. Ensure the inclusion of all students in accordance with et cetera, including accommodations where appropriate. So I wasn't sure if that was still captured in the new language, both from a IEP perspective, but also I'm curious what our policy as a district around when a student can be denied participation in a field trip, under what are the criteria that we are saying is okay. And I'm thinking in terms of, especially around PBIS and other kinds of programs we're using for culture and climate, where we don't want to punish students by taking away things when possible, is my understanding. So it's a two-part question. One is actually, I guess, more of the accessibility and IEP side. Does that need to be reflected? And then the other was more around a cultural policy question.
to answer the first question, the end, you're correct. We need to ensure that all students with 504 agreements and IEPs are being adhered to during a field trip, and that is in the AR in this section.
Is there a reason we shouldn't include it at a policy level, since we do want to not allow that to not be covered legally, I assume? Sorry, that was too many negatives, but you know.
Yeah. I think the intent is to ensure that all students are given access. We can add language to kind of.
The purpose is that.
Wherever it's most appropriate, whether it's purpose or guidelines, I'm not sure what is the like legally speaking, where the best place to have that strikes me as a guideline. Our practices must adhere to these, this step. Does that address that second question of the, just in terms of the PBIS programming and in terms of when students outside of an IEP might be told they cannot go, or are we allowing that to happen? Where a student can be told they're not able to go on a field trip because they didn't increase their standardized test score high enough, or because they acted out in class too often, or whatever it might be. I know that's more.
That's case by case. So yes, that could happen,
Okay.
but it's based on the unique circumstances of that case. I mean, for instance, with seniors right now, prom is tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
There was communication that was sent out around expectations with behavior, where the prom is an event, not the same as a field trip, but as a district, we reserve the right, based on what's in the student code of conduct,
Mm-hmm.
to address any circumstance that may arise. So that's definitely our current practice.
Got it. Thank you.
Clarifying the statement on inclusion, are we going to include something in the policy that explicitly states we're going to be focusing on inclusion in some way, or leaning towards inclusion for students with disabilities? I'm thinking about mobility differences, those kind of things.
I'm happy to kind of take that sentiment and add a sentence similar to that last bullet point for
Yeah.
second read. Is that?
Yeah, that's.
Can you like,
that would be
maybe do
great.
that? Okay. Yeah, we can definitely do that. I'll note that change.
I just wanted to make sure we had. Okay.
Yep. We can do that.
Thank you.
I'm open to that, and I know in other areas, when you started talking about the all students piece, we've added that and like that's our core mission and purpose. So if it's like both places, wherever we can say it, let's be explicit, like, hey, this is for all students.
Yes.
And then in our guidelines, let's be particular around. So yeah, I'm thinking about that and whatever,
Yes.
wherever possible to be explicit.
We'll do that for the next meeting.
Just checking in, Mrs. Henry, anything on the topic, provoke any thoughts for you, just checking in with your virtual?
No questions or comments from me.
I saw the cross-reference to volunteers, but it just seems like an easy opportunity to mention you don't need a TB test to go on certain field trips. Again, if that's a place that's appropriate, maybe in the AR or somewhere. Yeah, it's probably more of an AR thing, but because I see the cross-reference to volunteers, but if possible, wherever we can say that, seems like another opportunity
To list the requirements of.
like the direct yeah, because most field trips you don't need, or yeah, most times when you need to become a volunteer in order to go on a field trip, from the parent perspective, there was some confusion around what you actually need to do. So we actually updated our volunteer policy like last legislative meeting to be very explicit around who needs to take a TB test and who does not need to take a TB test. And so because I saw the cross-reference to volunteers policy, I'm just wondering, that's what I'm saying, maybe it's in the AR somewhere where if there's any parent participation related to field trips, just being explicit that, hey, our process is actually easier than something like
Right now, this does not have that in there.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned.
We can add something.
As appropriate, yeah.
Okay, I can,
Yeah, as appropriate.
okay.
I mean, do others, I'm just one person here.
I think the cross-reference to the volunteer policy is okay. I mean, I think that's enough. I mean, I know that we've had a lot of confusion about that in particular, so I understand wanting to be as clear as possible. And we don't ever reference anything that's not a policy, right? We don't reference like a link to how to become a volunteer or anything. It's all, when we within a policy, all references are just other policies.
Yeah, well then, I guess a component to yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
so then field trips, I mean, there's the field trip itself, what a field trip means. There's students who go on that field trip, what is permissible or not. And so then I guess it would be, I guess maybe the cross-reference is sufficient, but then it does seem like there's a piece missing to this policy to like other people who will be on this field trip, including community members, parents, that. So maybe, I guess maybe the cross-reference is enough, but.
In the AR,
oh, yeah.
it says that chaperones are required to submit background check certifications to the
Okay,
extent
yeah.
required by board
Right.
policy. Which I think is referencing the volunteer policy, but I guess maybe aligning the language.
Actually, yeah, because our chaperones direct volunteers. So
Yes, they are. Well, they're not,
Well-
no, they're not direct in that they need a TB test now.
So that's my point. So then that would be a point of clarity that we need, because now we have actually a new term, chaperone. And so we updated our policy to be explicit about what a direct volunteer is and who is not a direct volunteer. And so now it's unclear now if a chaperone would be a direct volunteer or not. So I guess maybe this is a point of, does this make sense to others? Because throwing out now a new term is, it's actually, for me, it actually begs more confusion.
Well, just to unpack my understanding, I could imagine a circumstance where a chaperone is a direct volunteer or is an indirect volunteer, meaning it's a sort of a secondary, it's in terms of the volunteer policy saying when you need a TB test, if you're chaperoning an overnight trip to the Franklin Institute, that would mean you're a direct volunteer, you need a TB test. If you're chaperoning a trip to a pool party for 4 hours, I think my understanding is you wouldn't need a TB test for that. So trying to tie in beyond a reference might actually add confusion, ironically, unless, or maybe making it explicit that this is not overriding could be worthwhile as well.
And this actually I don't know if this provides any clarity, but there is this line that says chaperones are required to adhere to the rules, regulations, and expectations as detailed in 916. To answer the question, yes, I think chaperones do need to adhere to the school volunteer requirements.
It's actually there.
I
So to
think,
my
yeah,
original
yeah.
question, it's there. It is. Yeah.
I didn't get that far.
Yeah, I didn't. All right. Lovely, thank you.
All's well that ends.
Yeah. All right, so opening up to any comments from our community. That'll move forward for first read, and we can move forward to our next item.
Next is 121.1, other student trips.
Opening up to overall explanation or.
I think given that field trips was being looked at, student travel was just another policy that kind of lent itself to be looked at. There were no substantive changes here, just very minor grammar changes, and we consolidated the cross references at the end. And you will see that we are removing the AR. The purpose here is that this essentially says, the policy says that the superintendent or their designee shall approve all student travel. So there was really no need to have that separate AR that reference a form that. So no substantive changes in this very short policy.
Sorry,
Mrs. Mullen?
is it? On the agenda, it says other student trips, this. In the
Travel.
it's, okay, that's what I wanted to understand, okay, so 121.1 is other student travel, not.
Correct. Yes, you are correct.
Any comments from the public? All right, we'll move forward to 214.
Policy AR 214. You have it?
Yep.
Student grade point average.
So I don't believe any substantive changes were made to the policy, but this came into play. It's my understanding that changes were made to the AR because for a time being, the district changed its procedures on how to calculate GPA, and it was doing different calculations for different class years. And now moving forward, all grades will be adhering to the same standards. So that replaces this reference to the individual class years.
Yeah, as a reminder, the administrative regulations are not subject to a vote. And so I guess procedural question. Is this, what do we do in these situations? Is this just for public notice that we're changing the AR or?
We include the AR on the board.
It's only dependent, yeah.
Yes. We include it so it can still be reviewed. If anyone wanted to make comments or contact you or Dr. Scriven, they can still do that. But it's just not subject to vote the same way a policy is. But we've been giving the ARs the same exposure, I'll call it, as we do with policies.
Yeah. No, that's pretty clear on the agenda. Just making sure procedural. Any other comments?
Pull up the AR, because that's where most of the changes were made.
They'd still do it first read and second read.
Yeah, that's
then
kind of
if
what I
it's-
was.
Because
I
not,
don't-
because we're not voting on it.
Right.
Since you got for
For
public.
public.
Right, that's. Oh, yes, thanks. I would have known.
At the bottom of the AR, it mentions transfer of credits from Sec 2 to 4-year institutions. That's the language we do need to revisit because the state now requires if our students are dually enrolled at an institution that we now put those courses credits on our transcripts and give them the same weighting as an AP course, as long as it's a college bearing course, not like a remedial course taken at the college level, but if a kid takes English 110 at NACO, that should show up as English 110 on our transcript, it says Montgomery County Community College, but the actual weight is now the same as the AP course that they took, AP English at the high school as well. So that's the language we may need to revisit because the new state guidelines says that we, with dual credit, we have a memorandum of understanding with the institution that those students, if it's pre-approved by us, of course, that those students get that weighting. And that there it says doesn't show it. So it shows up on their transcript as pass fail, and they don't get credits right now. That's how it currently reads.
Okay, so it's this section right here.
Yes.
We can definitely make
Okay.
those changes.
Mr. Schultz?
I'm going to ask an annoying algorithmic question, so please bear with me. This was raised by a community member
Yes.
probably 4 years ago around, you know, what I'm gonna ask about, around the study hall versus music class.
Yes, and this is how we came up with the new algorithm calculation to meet that. And this was already board approved because we followed the recommendation.
Then I'm just gonna, instead of it being annoying, it's a round of applause for addressing that. 'Cause that was a hard I didn't know the answer. I just wanted to know if it had been thought of. Thank you. For the new board members, previous version had a circumstance where somebody taking all AP courses would be benefiting by taking a study hall instead of taking an extracurricular. And because it would have lowered their GPA to add that weight. But this has resolved it, so that's wonderful. Thank you.
Any other comments, thoughts? From the public? That concludes our agenda for tonight. So the next date for the policy committee meeting is to be determined. Right. So I will await Mr. Schultz's motion to adjourn.
I would like to move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Meeting adjourned and thank you.